Yo guys, what's going on? It's Shauno here, and today I'm going to show you how you can pass really high as a mage. Right now I'm actually the second highest ranked Arcane mage on the Horde side in Europe. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of people from my guild have been asking for advice on how to play mage, so I just decided I would create a guide, try to help as many people as possible. What I'm about to bring you is from my personal experience, and it will help you improve your DPS and your passes. So if you're interested in improving your passes on Warcraft logs, this guide is for you. But before we start, consider subscribing to my channel, as I'm looking to bring loads of mage content to the channel in the future. There are timestamps in the description, so if there's something specifically you want to look at, you can go and skip to that. But I would recommend just listening to everything, as there's probably lots of advice you can receive from this video. To start off, we're going to go through talents. So obviously the talents are all going to be in the Arcane tree, as we're talking about Arcane Mage specifically right now. So the first two talents will be in Arcane Subtlety. This reduces your target's resistance to your spells by 10, but most importantly it will reduce the threat by 40%. Then the other 3 points we want to put in Arcane Focus. Now technically this overcaps our hit rating, but improved arcane missiles are not so good for you, so you may as well take 3 out of 5 Arcane Focus. Now a little bit on the hit rating. Before Season of Discovery launched, we all assumed it was going to be a 15% hit rating. It was actually a 5%, so technically when you're taking 3 in there, you're hitting 6% hit, which is well over the hit cap when you take into consideration like consumables and everything. But like I just said, arcane missiles is just not any good to us, so we may as well just use the 3 out of 5, and then we don't necessarily need all of the consumables all of the time for like dungeons and stuff. Next we'll want 5 out of 5 arcane concentration. In my opinion, this is the best talent in the Arcane tree. It has a 10% chance to reduce the mana cost of your next spell. It's that nice noise that you hear when it procs, and there's no internal cooldown, so with some luck it can just proc constantly in a row, especially when we're AoEing. From here the talent tree is a little bit open. There's lots of options you could take, but not that great options. I would definitely go with 3 out of 3 improved Arcane Explosion. It gives us an extra 6% crit on the Arcane Explosion, which is great for all of the trash AoE and bosses like Lorgus Jet. After this, you've got 2 talents you could either put in Magic Attunement, which would increase the benefit of our Amplify Magic by 50%. This is great for healing tanks, as it increases obviously the healing, but I generally go for 1 specialization, which increases the damage with 1s by 25%. In between trash and at the end of bosses, or if you're out of mana, you're going to be wanding, and it's just a nice little boost. There's not much else you can do to increase your DPS, so I just always go with this one. The last point will go into Arcane Meditation, which allows 5% of your mana regeneration to continue while casting, which helps with our mana basically. Now onto the runes, we're going to go with Burnout on chest. It's a 15% crit, which is huge. It increases our DPS the most out of all of the chest runes. Enlightenment is okay, but you're rarely above 70% mana, so you don't really benefit from it. Fingers of Frost is obviously more for AoE farming with like Living Bomb and Blizzard. And then obviously Regeneration is our healing talent, so we won't be taking that unless we're healing. For hands, there's not really much to say. You can't really be an Arcane Mage without Arcane Blast. That said, you might want to have like a spare set of gloves with Living Bomb on them to quickly change between like boss fights. If you're AoEing down trash, you could quickly swap it out. That's a lot quicker than obviously changing the whole rune, but you'll definitely want to go with Arcane Blast for the majority of the bosses. There's an argument that you could take Living Bomb for Lorgus Jet, but I just always go with Arcane Blast. For the legs, we'll be taking Living Flame. It's spellfire damage, so it counts as both an arcane spell and fire, but it benefits from Arcane Blast procs. Obviously the other options, Arcane Surge is not good outside of sort of cheesy PvP one-shots. Icy Veins is also an option if you're in like a mega pumper group and you're killing bosses in like 20 seconds or less. then you'll actually get more benefit from Icy Veins. I'm talking more for like Baron and Lady. You might get a bit more benefit from just taking Icy Veins and spamming Arcane Blast, but for the majority of the bosses you're going to be taking Living Flame, and it's going to help a lot more with trash in between pulls as well. That's everything for the talents. There isn't too many options to play with at the moment, and to be honest, going into the next phase, it's very much set in stone as well, so there's not really much we can change around. Next, we're going to talk about consumables and buffs. Obviously, if you want to pass really high, you have to get consumables and you have to get the world buffs every single raid. For the buffs, you'll want to have the boon of Black Fathom, which you can get from obviously standing in Thunderbluff. I'm going to assume that you know, but for those that don't know, when you actually kill the final boss, you get a quest. If you go and hand that quest in at Thunderbluff, it gives a world buff to everyone in that area. So that's what you'll want. It increases your hit by 3%, 25 spell damage and 20% movement speed. Obviously we know we're hit capped, so the hit isn't really that important. We're mostly using it for the spell damage and the movement speed. You'll also want the Dark Moon Fair buff for the damage, which increases the damage by 10%. This is the best one you can get by far, so don't bother to try and get intellect or something else thinking that it's better. It's not. You want the flat 10% damage. If you don't know how to get the Dark Moon Fair buff, just look up online. You can also download add-ons that will just select the right buff for you. Now those two buffs can obviously be booned, so if you're really efficient you can sort of get 3 or 4 raids out of them. The last buff you can only get it once a week by completing the Ashenvale event quest, which will give you either the battle drum if you're on the Horde or the battle hymn if you're on the Alliance, and it's an on-use item that you can use obviously inside the raid, and it gives you a 5% damage boost. The only issue with it is it can't be booned, so you have to kind of use it when you want to pass. If it's like an ult or you don't play that much, you can actually raid log with it, but you've obviously got to be careful that you don't get killed, because you will lose it. For consumables, you'll want mana potions for obviously restoring mana. Go with mana potion if you can afford it, otherwise go with lesser mana potion. You'll want to be using these on every single boss. The other things you can get are obviously the Mage scrolls. If you don't know about the Mage scrolls, just leave a comment below and I'll explain them to you. But basically you can use an offensive scroll and a defensive scroll. For the offensive scroll, we want to use the Scroll of Arcane Power, which gives 1% crit, and for the defensive scroll we want to use the one of Recovery, which gives us 8 mana per 5 seconds. For the buff food, you want the Smoked Sagefish, which gives 3 mana per 5 seconds. We'll want the Elixir of Firepower, which will increase the Living Flame and Fire Blast damage. We'll want Scroll of Spirit for more mana return. We'll also want the Black Fathom Mana Oil, which gives us 12 mana per 5 seconds. It also gives hit rating, but as explained before, we do not need the hit rating, but the mana per 5 seconds is really nice. Then if you really want to min-max, you can get the Strong Troll's Blood for some health regeneration, Rumsey Rum Black Label for a 15 stamina buff. You can get Heavy Dynamite to help with AoE, and sort of it's like free damage to the bosses. Obviously you need to be engineering, otherwise you can use Easier Throw Dynamite as well. You'll also want Free Action Potion. This is mostly to immune Kelris's chains, but you can also use it on Lady to immune the frost on the ground. You can have Shadow Protection Potion, which you can pre-pot on Gelihast to avoid sort of Murloc damage, and you can use it on Kelris as well to reduce damage you take in the second phase. For the professions, I would recommend Tailoring and Engineering. Tailoring because you can craft your epic boots, which are great. For the on-use effect, it's really good for AoE. They're also the second best in slot. It's also a good profession moving forward because a lot of the good gear will come from tailoring. Engineering is also good because you obviously can use the dynamites. You can also use the best in slot trinket at the moment, which will restore health and mana, and that really helps in the long fights. That's it for the consumables and professions. The next part is the most complex part, which is about the rotation. Now, this is a common misconception, but the arcane rotation is actually a lot more complicated than people think. So feel free to obviously take notes or go back. Technically, yes, it is literally 2 or 3 buttons, but it's also knowing how to utilize your mana. Like, if you go out of mana on a boss, then you've used way too much, and obviously your DPS will drop off. But if you've got to the end of the boss and you're half mana, then clearly you haven't used your mana to its full potential. Arcane Blast is our main DPS spell. Each time we use it, we gain a stack which increases the damage of our next arcane spell by 15%, but also the mana cost by 175%, and this stacks up to 4 times. So obviously we'll want to use arcane missiles or arcane explosion to sort of drop these stacks. I'll happily do another video going more in depth into this if that's what people want. Just write a comment and let me know. But as a general rotation, you'll want to cast 4 arcane blasts into a living flame. Now this could be different on Baron and Lady, since the fight might be so short you could literally living flame straight away. Also, on the turtle boss, you may choose to use the living flame when he starts to take more damage, but it depends if you're killing him in under 1 minute. If you're not killing him in under 1 minute, then you have a chance to use it again, so it's best to just use it straight away. So once you've done your 4 arcane blasts into a living flame, you'll want to utilize your mana depending on your gear. If you're perfectly geared, then your max DPS rotation is going to be 4 arcane blasts into arcane missiles, but just 1 channel. Not a full channel of arcane missiles, just 1 channel to reset the stacks. That's it. If you're using too much mana, then you should channel the full arcane missiles, but it's going to be less DPS. If you're still using too much mana, you could consider just doing 2 or 3 stacks of arcane blasts into arcane missiles. It's also different by each boss. Sometimes on Baron, for example, I don't even use arcane missiles. Since the boss will die so fast before I run out of mana, I just spam arcane blasts. Even with 4 stacks, I just want to drop him as quickly as possible. I'll probably make another video on the rotation for each boss rather than just a summarize, but for this video, as an overall summary, you'll want to 4 times arcane blast into a living flame, then 4 times arcane blast into either a full channel of arcane missiles or just a single channel of arcane missiles. It really depends on how much mana you've got left and how long the fight is. For sort of stat priority, we have intellect and we have spell damage. They are equal. It really depends on your gear. If you're low geared, you'll want more intellect to begin with so that you don't go out of mana, but once you find that you're not going out of mana, you can sort of go harder on the spell damage. Eventually spell damage will just become priority naturally because you get it with every bit of gear anyway, but intellect is still a good stat to have, so obviously you can't just go all out on like green arcane damage gear because you'll just run out of mana. The next stat behind sort of intellect and spell damage is spirit. It just gives us a little bit of mana regeneration, which is better DPS than stamina. Then obviously you would have had stamina. You don't take agility or strength. Most people should know that by now. Okay, so if you're this far into the video, I just want to say thank you, and if you've enjoyed, please consider obviously giving me a sub. I'll be planning to do a lot more content into Season of Discovery, so you may find lots of good information in future videos, so it's well worth subscribing. Next we're going to talk about the BiS lists, or best in slot lists. So we'll start off with the head. Now the actual best in slot head is the thinking cap, but this depends on whether you've got the 2 set from the chest and feet. Otherwise having sort of the epic boots and the set helm. But to summarize, the actual BiS in the end will be the thinking cap, so you'll definitely want to roll on this, and it's worth rolling on the set helm as well. For pre-raid, you don't really have much options. Obviously, if you're an engineer, you can go for shadow goggles. For the necklace, we have the jagged bone necklace from Lord Kelris. You can also get the green necklace of intellect or of the owl, but usually it's very expensive, so it's not worth buying. The droplet choker is better than nothing, and that drops from Baron quite often. I've seen it a lot of times already. For shoulders, we have the Invoker's Mantle from Tailoring. You can buy these pretty cheap on the auction house, or you can even craft them yourself. You've also got the Magician's Mantle from the auction house. It's good for the extra intellect, but it's usually quite expensive, and the Invoker's Mantle will be a lot cheaper, and it will end up the best in slot anyway, so I just say go with the Invoker's Mantle. For the cloak, I just have the Flowing Scarf from Baron, but if you don't need the intellect, you can also get the green cloak of Arcane Wrath, which gives 9 arcane spell damage, but usually the scarf is better if you need the intellect, obviously. You could also use the Sergeant's Cloak for the stats if you're rank 3, but for sort of pre-raid BiS, you can buy any green cloak of the owl, it'll be fine. For the chest, you want the Twilight Invoker's robes, which drop from Gelihast or Lorgus Jet. For the pre-raid BiS, you could use the robes of Aragorn from SFK, you could use the Black Velvet robes or the Necroology robes from the auction house. You've got the robes of Arcana, are a cheap option as well. For the wrist, the Mind Thrust braces are absolutely amazing. I was very lucky at the start that they dropped in SFK, but they're usually very expensive to buy. If you can't afford them, just buy either the braces of Arcane Wrath or of the owl, depending on if you want more spell damage or more intellect and spirit. For gloves, we have the black fingerless gloves from Lord Kelris. For the pre-raid BiS, any green gloves with the owl with 6 intellect and spirit. For the belt, we have the Invoker's Cord for the spell power, or if you need more intellect, then go for the belt of Aragorn. For legs, we have the Soul Leech pants from the last boss, but everyone will be looking for these, even the druids. They're so contested. You've also got the Gaze Dreamer leggings from Lord Kelris, but the Soul Leech pants are the best. For pre-raid, any green leggings of the owl are absolutely fine. For boots, the best in slot are actually the set boots. Having the chest and the boots as the 2 set with the thinking cap provides the most spell power and intellect. Pre-raid BiS, you should probably use the Spider Silk boots, as you'll upgrade them to the epic ones, and you'll use those epic ones until you have the boots and the chest for the 2 set. For rings, you want the Signet of the Twilight Lord from Lord Kelris, the Advisor's Ring from being honoured with your Warsong Gulch faction. The pre-BiS options are Lavishly Jeweled Ring from Deadmines, or you can use Zora's Will from the auction house just for the flat 5 intellect. For trinkets, you'll want the Void Pearl from the last boss quest, obviously. The second trinket will be from engineering. Otherwise, you'll use the Rune of Perfection from being friendly with the Warsong Gulch vendor. For wand, we'll want the Phoenix Ignition from Lord Kelris. You'll get the inscribed Gravestone Scepter from the quest, which is great. Now, Deadlight is also worth picking up, as it's an arcane wand, so you'll want it for if you ever run regeneration and you have to heal, as obviously arcane wand damage does proc healing. The pre-BiS is the fire starter, but to be honest, any wand is great. For weapon, you'll obviously want the big bad boy staff, which drops from Lord Kelris, but it's a very rare drop and it's highly contested. I've seen 1 drop since the very beginning, and that's it. So another option is to use the Dagger of Willing Sacrifice with the Tome of Cavern Lore. You can also use the Witch's Finger, which you'll get early on from the quest, or you can even run an Arcane Wrath offhand, which gives +9 arcane damage. Now I would say, regardless if you get the staff or not, to pick up the Dagger of Willing Sacrifice, as we'll want to use this in the next phase for 1 or 2 bosses in the new raid. Is going to be very useful, which I'll explain in another video. For the pre-BiS options, you've got the Crescent Staff if you're Horde, or you can go with the Emberstone Staff. Lastly, for the enchants, the most important ones are the +3 intellect on the staff, the +3 intellect on the braces. You can go with minor stats or +30 mana on the chest, shadow resistance on the cloak. Then if you really want to min-max, you can get the +1 stamina on the boots, then a heavy armor kit on your gloves and legs, but those are really not necessary. But if you really want to min-max, then go for it. You might take a hit or 2 when you're AoEing, so it might help with damage reduction. Now if you've made it this far, then thank you so much, and I've got a final surprise for you. I'm going to give you my top tricks for each boss you can find inside BFD. If you have any questions at all, remember you can post in the comments below and I'll get back to you straight away. So for the first boss, Baron, instead of going to the platform, just cast from the shore. This way you can get full DPS and you don't have to worry about the debuff, so it's an easy 99 if you do that. For the turtle boss, you can ask your raid to include all the initial turtles, as you'll get some extra padding if you AoE them all down. You can step on the bubbles to restore your mana, but make sure you tell your healers that that's what you're doing. For safety, I'd recommend using your engineered trinket right after he does the AoE damage, because that way you'll basically be full health after you've used it. For the lady boss, try to precast and get the first cast in. Use Living Flame straight away for some padding with the add. DPS it down just by spamming Arcane Blast. If your mana allows it, just spam Arcane Blast and that's it. For Gelihast, ask the team if you can use the safe spot. Now there's a couple of safe spots for this run. Ideally you would use the melee safe spot, but obviously you'll have to ask your raid if you can do that, because if everyone stands in the safe spot, it no longer becomes a safe spot. But if you tell your raid you just want to pass and stand there, then it will give you a chance to precast Arcane Blast the moment he becomes attackable, and that way you can get the most damage per second. Lorgus Jet is a great boss for us. Just DPS the priestesses down as much as possible. Aim to have 4 stacks of Arcane Blast for when the boss comes. Then you can Living Flame him straight away. Get all of the adds onto the boss. Tell everyone just stand on the boss if you've got adds. Then you can obviously Nova them all and just massive AoE damage. This will give you an easy 99 pass. Lord Kelris isn't a great boss for us. I would recommend using a pre-pop of Shadow Potion and use a free action potion on the final phase. The other thing is when he casts his shadow damage onto the floor, try to get your cast in before moving. You can obviously see the missile heading towards you, so don't panic by the circle on the ground. Just get the cast done and then move. That will help your DPS. The final boss, you can stand on top of him. A lot of people don't really realise that. If you stand on top of him, then you can just move from his frontal very easily. Usually most groups will solo tank him, but if you want some extra padding and DPS, you can ask them to remove their debuffs and spawn the adds, just so you can get a massive DPS spike with the adds on there. Be sure to check out this video on the screen right now, but hopefully you got some value out of today, and thank you very much.